On the night of December 15th, 1852, at Blackwood Plantation in Adams County, Mississippi, 3 black panthers burst through the crystal windows of the grand ballroom during the most anticipated Christmas celebration of the social season. In 17 minutes, 7 white men were torn apart in front of 143 witnesses. The screams echoed across the Mississippi River. Blood-stained white marble floors imported from Italy. Chandeliers swayed as bodies crashed beneath them. By the time the last panther disappeared into the night, Natchez society would never feel safe again. But the Panthers didn't attack randomly. They had been trained meticulously, patiently for 2 years by a slave named Josiah, who had lost everything 6 months earlier and decided that if white men could hunt black people for sport, then nature itself could return the favor. This is the story of how one man turned predators into instruments of perfect justice, and how Mississippi's elite learned that not all animals on the plantation were domesticated. Blackwood Plantation sat on 4,200 acres of prime Mississippi Delta land, 12 miles north of Natchez on the high bluffs overlooking the river. The soil was so rich it grew cotton 5 feet tall. Master Cornelius Blackwood owned 237 slaves, making him the 3rd wealthiest plantation owner in Adams County. His cotton fetched premium prices in New Orleans and Liverpool. His wealth was measured not just in land and slaves, but in power. He served on the county board, owned shares in 3 steamboats, and his wife, Magnolia Blackwood, hosted the social events that determined who mattered in Mississippi society. The big house was a monument to excess. Greek Revival architecture with 26 Corinthian columns, each one representing a year of profitable cotton harvest, 3 stories tall, with 52 rooms. The grand ballroom alone could hold 200 guests, and featured a ceiling painted with scenes from Greek mythology. Ironic, considering the house was built by enslaved hands that would never be celebrated in art. The furniture came from France, the rugs from Persia, the crystal chandeliers from Austria, every luxury imaginable purchased with money, squeezed from black bodies working 18-hour days in fields that stretched to the horizon. December in Mississippi meant cotton was picked, ginned, baled, and sold. The hardest work of the year was done. For the whites, this meant celebration season. For the enslaved, it meant a brief respite before land preparation began in January. The Blackwood Christmas Ball was the pinnacle of the social calendar. Invitations were coveted. Families traveled from as far as Vicksburg and Jackson to attend. It was where marriages were arranged, business deals were made, and the hierarchy of Southern aristocracy was reinforced through display of wealth and refinement. But in the slave quarters, a different kind of preparation was happening. One that had been in motion for 730 days. One that would end in blood and screaming, and a reckoning that white Natchez thought impossible. Josiah was 38 years old when everything that made life bearable was taken from him. He stood 6'2", and tall, unusually tall, for a slave who had grown up on reduced rations. His body was lean muscle stretched over a frame built for endurance. His hands were massive, scarred from decades of outdoor work. His face was weathered dark by the Mississippi sun, with deep lines around his eyes from years of tracking in bright daylight. Those eyes were his most remarkable feature. Sharp, observant, missing nothing. The kind of eyes that could spot a deer's track 3 days old or read a man's intentions from 20 paces. He had been born on Blackwood Plantation 38 years earlier, the son of Clara and Moses. His mother died when he was 6, succumbing to fever that swept through the quarters that winter. His father had been sold south when Josiah was 9, punishment for breaking an overseer's jaw after the man kicked young Josiah for moving too slowly. Josiah never saw Moses again, raised by the elderly woman Sarah, who told him stories of Africa she had heard from her grandmother. Josiah learned early that love was dangerous on a plantation, because anything you loved could be used against you, but he loved anyway. When he was 22, he married Ruth in a ceremony not recognized by law, but sacred in their hearts. They jumped the broom behind the quarters on a Sunday afternoon, with 40 witnesses singing spirituals. Ruth was 19, a field hand with a smile that made even the worst days bearable. She got pregnant twice in the first 3 years, but both babies died before their first birthdays. The first from fever, the second from something the white doctor couldn't diagnose and didn't care enough to investigate. Ruth cried for months after each death. Josiah held her and sang the songs Sarah had taught him. African melodies whose words were lost, but whose meaning remained. Endure, survive, remember. Then, when Josiah was 29 and Ruth was 26, their daughter Naomi was born. She survived the first year, then the second. By the time she turned 3, they dared to hope. Naomi grew into a bright, curious child, with her mother's smile and her father's observant eyes. She learned to walk quietly, speak softly, and make herself invisible when white people were near. Survival skills every slave child had to master, but in the quarters, she was joyful. She sang while her mother cooked. She followed Josiah when he returned from the woods, pestering him with questions about every plant and animal. He taught her everything: how to identify edible roots, how to read the sky for weather, how to move through the forest without disturbing the leaves. Josiah's official function on the plantation was hunter and tracker. Master Blackwood fancied himself a sportsman and demanded fresh game for his table. Venison, turkey, duck, quail, rabbit. Josiah provided it. He also tracked runaway slaves, a duty that made him hated by some in the quarters, but which he performed with a subtle sabotage. The overseers never detected. He found runaways slowly, giving them extra hours of head start, and when he did find them, his reports often included details about difficult terrain or dangerous wildlife that discouraged vigorous pursuit. 3 times he had helped runaways escape by declaring them dead at the swamp, providing just enough disturbed earth and torn fabric to make it believable. This work gave Josiah privileges other slaves lacked. He was allowed to move freely through the forests surrounding the plantation. He carried weapons, hunting rifles, knives, sometimes a crossbow. He was occasionally given shoes and warmer clothing for winter hunting. Most importantly, he had knowledge. He knew every acre of the 4,200 that made up Blackwood land. He knew the swamps where panthers lived. He knew the caves where bears hibernated. He knew which plants healed and which plants killed. His grandfather had been captured in West Africa in 1796, a hunter from a people who tracked lions across the savannah. The knowledge passed through 3 generations, adapted to Mississippi's forests, but fundamentally unchanged. How to read an animal's mind through its tracks. How to predict behavior by understanding hunger and fear. How to communicate through stillness rather than movement. How to become part of the forest instead of an intruder in it. Josiah possessed a knowledge of the natural world that exceeded that of any white man in Mississippi. Master Blackwood bragged about his remarkable Negro, who could find game where others saw empty forest. What Blackwood didn't understand was that this knowledge could be turned to purposes beyond providing meat for the master's table. Josiah lived in the quarters with Ruth and Naomi in a cabin, measuring 12 feet by 14 feet. 1 room, dirt floor, gaps in the walls that let in wind and rain, a fireplace that smoked more than it heated, 3 pallets on the floor for sleeping, a table Josiah had built from scrap lumber, 2 stools, 1 pot for cooking, 3 wooden bowls, 1 blanket for winter. This was their world, but within it, they had created something precious. They had created family. They sang together. Ruth told stories. Naomi learned to read from a primer Josiah had stolen from the big house, a crime punishable by whipping, but a risk he took because he wanted his daughter to have something he never had. On Sundays, their only partial day of rest, they walked to the edge of the forest, and Josiah showed Naomi animal tracks, teaching her to read the forest the way she was learning to read words. Ruth worked in the kitchen of the big house, a position slightly better than field work, but requiring 18-hour days and constant scrutiny from Mistress Magnolia, who believed all slaves were thieves and watched the food inventory obsessively. Ruth endured. She brought home scraps when possible. She learned which of the white folks could be approached with requests and which were dangerous. She protected Naomi by keeping the girl away from the big house, knowing that pretty slave children attracted the wrong kind of attention from white men. But protection only goes so far on a plantation. In the end, there is no safety, only the illusion of safety, maintained through constant vigilance and the hope that today will not be the day when everything falls apart. For Josiah and Ruth, that day came on June 7th, 1852. It was a Saturday. Master Blackwood's son, Nathaniel Blackwood, Jr., a 24 age, had arrived from New Orleans, where he attended Tulane University, and spent his father's cotton money on gambling, prostitutes, and maintaining the appearance of a gentleman. He was home for the summer, as he had been every summer, bringing with him a group of young men from wealthy families who spent their days drinking bourbon, hunting, and discussing politics and philosophy, while enslaved hands served their every need. On June 7th, Nathaniel Jr. and 4 companions decided to go hunting. They demanded Josiah guide them. He had no choice but to comply. Ruth packed him a small lunch. Naomi, now 9 years old, hugged him goodbye, and he promised to bring back a turkey for Sunday dinner. It was the last normal moment of his life. The hunting party rode out at 10 o'clock in the morning. 5 white men on horseback, armed with expensive rifles, Josiah on foot, carrying supplies, leading them toward a section of forest where turkeys were known to gather. The men were already drunk, passing a flask of whiskey between them, laughing too loudly, disturbing the game. Josiah knew they would find nothing with this approach, but said nothing. His job was to guide, not to educate white men who wouldn't listen anyway. What Josiah didn't know was that Ruth had sent Naomi after him with his forgotten knife, a small thing, but Josiah preferred having his own knife for field dressing game, rather than borrowing one from the whites. Naomi knew the direction they had gone. She had walked these paths with her father 100 times. She followed, carrying the knife, planning to catch up quickly, and returned to the quarters before her mother noticed she was gone. She caught up to the hunting party around noon in a clearing 3 miles from the big house, but she didn't immediately reveal herself. Some instinct, perhaps the survival instinct every slave child develops early, made her pause. The men had dismounted. They were drinking more whiskey. Their voices were ugly. Josiah was checking tracks near a fallen log, his back to the group, and then one of the men said something that made the others laugh. A comment Naomi didn't fully understand, but whose tone made her skin crawl. Nathaniel Jr. walked over to Josiah and kicked him in the back, knocking him forward. Josiah caught himself, said nothing, stood slowly. "Find us some game, boy, or we'll go back and find our own entertainment with that pretty cookwife of yours." The threat was clear. Josiah's jaw clenched, but he nodded and moved deeper into the forest. The men followed, still drinking, still laughing. Naomi stayed hidden, but she continued to follow. She needed to give her father the knife, but something felt wrong. The men's voices grew louder, more aggressive. They were complaining about the heat, about the lack of game, about wasting their day following a useless Negro into the woods. Around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Nathaniel Jr. declared he was bored with hunting and wanted to do something more interesting. What happened next occurred so quickly that Naomi barely understood it until it was over. Nathaniel Jr. told the others to grab Josiah. They wrestled him to the ground, 4 men against 1, pinning him face down in the dirt. Josiah fought, but he was unarmed and outnumbered. They tied his hands behind his back with rope from one of their saddles. Nathaniel Jr. drew his pistol and pressed it against the back of Josiah's head and said, "You stay still now, boy, or your brains paint these trees." Then Nathaniel Jr. called out toward the forest. "I know you're there, little girl. Saw you following half a mile back. Come on out now or your daddy dies." Naomi froze, her heart hammered against her ribs. She looked at her father pinned to the ground, and she looked at the white men with their weapons, and she was 9 years old and terrified. But she loved her father more than she feared the white men. She stepped out from behind the tree where she had hidden. Nathaniel Jr. smiled. "There she is, pretty little thing. Come here, girl," Josiah screamed. "Run! Naomi, run!" One of the men kicked him in the ribs, silencing him. Naomi didn't run. She walked forward slowly, carrying the knife, holding it out. "I brought Papa his knife," she said quietly. "That's all. I'll go home now." "Oh, you'll go home eventually," Nathaniel Jr. said. "But first, we're going to teach your daddy a lesson about who owns what on this plantation. See? Your daddy seems to forget sometimes that he doesn't own anything. Not this land, not himself, not his wife." He walked closer to Naomi, not his daughter. What happened in the next hour destroyed Josiah in ways that no whipping ever could. They made him watch. They held him down with a gun to his head, and they made him watch as they raped his 9-year-old daughter. All 5 of them, one after another, while she screamed and cried and called for her papa to help her. Josiah fought against the ropes until his wrists bled. He screamed until his voice broke. He begged, he pleaded, he offered anything. Take him, kill him, do anything but this. They laughed. "This is for your own good, boy, so you understand your place." When they were done, Naomi wasn't moving anymore. Her dress was torn away. Blood pooled beneath her small body. Her eyes were open, but empty. Nathaniel Jr. checked for a pulse, then shrugged. "She's dead. Fragile little things, these Pekingese." He said it casually, the way a man might comment on having broken a glass. They untied Josiah and stood back, weapons drawn. "You got a choice now, boy," Nathaniel Jr. said. "You can try to attack us and we'll kill you legal like self-defense, or you can pick up your dead daughter and carry her home and keep your mouth shut. And maybe we don't go visit that wife of yours tonight. Your choice." Josiah didn't attack them, not because he wasn't willing to die in that moment. Death seemed like mercy, but because Ruth was still alive. And if he died here, Nathaniel Jr. would visit her, would do to her what they had done to Naomi, and there would be no one to protect her or to avenge her. So Josiah picked up his daughter's broken body. He held her against his chest, feeling her blood soak into his shirt. He walked 3 miles back to the quarters, carrying her, not crying, not speaking, just walking with mechanical precision, while something inside him died, and something else, something cold and patient and absolutely merciless, was born. The white men rode back separately, laughing, discussing dinner plans, completely unconcerned. It was not yet 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Josiah arrived at the quarters just as the field hands were returning from the day's work. They saw him carrying Naomi. They saw the blood. Word spread instantly. Ruth came running from the big house, still wearing her kitchen apron. When she saw her daughter, she made a sound that wasn't quite human. a wail of pure anguish that made every person in the quarters stop what they were doing. She tried to take Naomi from Josiah, but he held on. "She's gone," he said quietly. "She's gone." "What happened?" Ruth demanded. "What happened to my baby?" Josiah's voice was empty. "Nathaniel Jr. and his friends." Ruth understood immediately. Every enslaved woman understood that violence. She collapsed to her knees in the dirt, keening, rocking back and forth. The elderly Sarah came and sat beside her, saying nothing because there were no words. Josiah carried Naomi into their cabin. He laid her on her pallet, the one where she had slept every night of her life. He straightened her torn dress as best he could, trying to give her some dignity in death. He fetched water and a cloth and cleaned the blood from her face and legs, gentle, treating her body with the reverence it deserved, even though she was beyond pain now. Ruth came in and helped, both of them performing this final act of parenting in silence, broken only by Ruth's sobbing. That night, they buried Naomi in the small slave cemetery behind the quarters. There was no minister. Teaching slaves to read the Bible was illegal, and white preachers wouldn't perform funeral services for black children. But the community gathered. They sang spirituals, songs whose surface lyrics spoke of heaven, but whose deeper meanings spoke of deliverance and justice, and the faith that evil would be punished, if not in this world, then in the next. They sang, "Swing low, sweet chariot, and steal away to Jesus, and wade in the water." Josiah didn't sing. He stood beside the grave as 3 men filled it with earth, and he stared toward the big house, visible in the distance, lit up for a dinner party when Nathaniel Jr. and his friends were drinking wine and eating food Ruth had prepared just hours after they murdered her child. Later that night, in their cabin, Ruth asked the question Josiah knew was coming. "Will we tell Master Blackwood what his son did?" Josiah looked at her, and his eyes were different than they had been that morning. Colder, distant, like looking into a frozen river. "No," he said quietly. "Why not? It was wrong. It was evil. He should be punished." "He won't be punished, Ruth. We're property. Naomi was property. You don't punish a white man for damaging his own property. Then we run. We head north tonight. We follow the North Star and we—" "Nuts." Josiah's voice was firm. "Not yet. Then what? We just stay here? We just let them get away with murdering our baby?" Josiah was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, but Ruth heard every word clearly. "I'm going to kill them. All 5 of them. Not tomorrow. Not in a way that looks like revenge, but I'm going to kill them. Every single one." Ruth stared at her husband. "Josiah, they'll hang you. They'll burn you alive. Maybe. But I'm going to kill them first." "How?" Josiah looked toward the window, toward the dark forest beyond. "I've been tracking panthers for 3 years now. Master Blackwood once stuffed for his study. There's a female with 2 cubs, almost grown now, living in the caves near Jackson Creek. I've been studying her. I know how she hunts. I know how she thinks." He paused. "I know how to train animals, Ruth. My grandfather trained dogs in Africa. The knowledge is in my blood. If I can train a dog, I can train a cat. That's impossible. Panthers are wild. They can't be trained. Dogs were wild once, too. Wolves. But someone patient enough, smart enough, can train anything that has a brain and a stomach. It'll take time. Maybe a year, maybe 2. But I can do it." Ruth shook her head. "Even if you could, what then? You just send panthers to attack them. Not just attack, hunt specifically. I need them to target specific men, Nathaniel Jr. and his 4 friends, no one else. It has to be precise, and that's madness, Josiah." "Maybe, but it's the only madness that makes sense right now." He reached out and took Ruth's hands. I can't fight them with guns or knives. There are too many. I can't challenge them to a fair fight, because there's no such thing as a fair fight between a slave and a master. But nature doesn't care about white or black. A panther doesn't know that Nathaniel Jr. comes from a wealthy family. A panther just knows prey. And if I can make those 5 men pray, he trailed off. Ruth cried quietly. I can't lose you too. You won't. I'll be careful. I'll be patient. But I'm doing this, Ruth, for Naomi. And because if I don't, I'll die anyway. Not my body, my soul. I'll die from the inside out from swallowing this rage. This way, at least I fight back. Ruth nodded slowly. Then I'll help. Whatever you need. I need you to survive, Josiah said. If this goes wrong, you run. You get to the Underground Railroad. Sarah knows the contacts. You get north. You tell Naomi's story. And you live free. Promise me. I promise. But you promise me something too. You come back. You survive this. Josiah couldn't make that promise honestly, so he simply pulled his wife close and held her while she cried for the daughter they would never see, grow up, never see married, never see, have children of her own. He held her, and he silently swore an oath to the ancestors, to his grandfather, to Naomi's spirit. Justice would come. Not today, but it would come. The next morning, Josiah returned to work, as if nothing had happened. He moved through the plantation with his usual quiet competence. He tracked game. He brought back venison. He spoke when spoken to, and never volunteered information. The overseers noticed he seemed subdued, but attributed it to grief and considered it appropriate. Slaves who lost children weren't expected to bounce back immediately. What they didn't see was Josiah's mind working constantly. He observed everything. He noted Nathaniel Jr.'s routines. The young man slept until noon, spent afternoons drinking with friends, attended dinner parties at neighboring plantations 3 nights a week, went hunting every Saturday. He noted the friends Thomas Caldwell, Robert Hampton, James Rutherford, and William Peaton, all from wealthy planter families, all in their early 20s, all arrogant and cruel in the casual way of men who had never faced consequences. Josiah cataloged their habits, their schedules, their vulnerabilities. Thomas Caldwell was a drunk who often passed out in compromising locations. Robert Hampton had a gambling problem and spent hours alone in the plantation office reviewing debts. James Rutherford fancied himself a naturalist and often walked alone in the gardens identifying birds. William Peon visited the slave quarters at night, hunting for women to assault, thinking darkness made him invisible. Each had patterns, each had moments of vulnerability, and each would die. But first, Josiah had to build his instruments of vengeance. 3 days after Naomi's murder, Josiah requested permission to spend extra time tracking the panther Master Blackwood wanted killed. He explained that the animal was elusive and would require sustained effort. Master Blackwood, pleased that his property was so dedicated, granted permission. Josiah was allowed to spend up to 3 nights a week in the forest, provided he continued to deliver game for the table. Josiah began his work immediately. He located the panther den near Jackson Creek, a cave system cut into limestone bluffs 5 miles from the big house. The female panther, he named her Nemesis in his mind after the Greek goddess of revenge that Naomi had learned about from the stolen primer, was magnificent. 8 feet long from nose to tail tip, weighing perhaps 160 pounds. Pure muscle and predatory intelligence. Her 2 cubs were adolescents now, nearly full grown, a male and a female. He named them Fury and Vengeance. For the first month, Josiah simply observed. He watched from concealment as Nemesis taught her cubs to hunt. He watched them take down a deer, working together with coordinated precision. He watched them play, wrestling and chasing each other with kitten-like enthusiasm. He watched them sleep, curled together in the cave entrance during daylight hours. He learned their patterns, their preferences, their personalities. Nemesis was cautious, intelligent, careful. Fury, the male cub, was bold and aggressive. Vengeance, the female, was the smartest, patient, and calculating. In the second month, Josiah began leaving food, not near the den that would frighten them, but along their hunting routes. Fresh-killed rabbits and turkeys positioned in places they would find them. At first, they were suspicious, circling the carcasses, checking for traps. But hunger eventually overcame caution, and they ate. Josiah did this 3 times a week, always in different locations, but always along routes they traveled. In the 3rd month, he began appearing near the food, staying downwind so they would see him before they smelled him. The first time Nemesis snarled, and the cubs fled. Josiah sat perfectly still, made no threatening moves, and eventually withdrew. The next time they watched him from a distance before approaching the food. By the 10th time, they accepted his presence as part of the ritual. The strange, 2-legged creature who brought food. Training a panther is not like training a dog. Dogs have been bred for thousands of years to respond to human commands, to seek approval, to work for praise. Panthers have no such instincts. They are pure predator, driven by hunger and territory and the laws of survival. You cannot command a panther. You can only make suggestions that align with what the panther already wants. What Josiah needed was for the panthers to associate specific men with prey. Not all men, just 5 specific men. He needed to make them hunters of humans, but selective hunters. This required understanding how panthers learn. In the 4th month, Josiah brought clothing belonging to Nathaniel Jr. He had stolen it from the laundry. Ruth processed a shirt sweat-soaked and ripe with the young man's scent. He rubbed raw meat with the shirt, let the fabric soak in blood, then presented this to the panthers. They were interested immediately. The scent was novel. The blood was attractive. They ate the meat and investigated the fabric. Josiah repeated this process for weeks, always using clothing from the same 5 men, always mixed with food and blood. He was teaching the panthers to associate these scents with something positive, eating, classical conditioning. Though Josiah didn't know the technical term for what he was doing, he only knew it worked. Dogs could be trained to salivate at the sound of a bell. Panthers could be trained to grow excited at certain scents. By the 6th month, the panthers would approach when they smelled the clothing. Anticipating food, Josiah graduated to the next phase. He constructed crude dummies, bundles of straw and fabric, shaped roughly like human bodies, and soaked them in the scents of the 5 men. He positioned these dummies in the forest and placed meat inside them. The panthers learned to tear open the dummies to get the food inside. Josiah watched carefully for signs of problems. If the panthers became aggressive toward him, the training was over. If they associated all humans with prey, they were useless. They would attack indiscriminately and be killed quickly. But Josiah had an advantage. He smelled different. He bathed with specific herbs, sage and cedar, scents foreign to the plantation, and wore clothing washed with these same herbs. He made himself distinct from other humans. The panthers learned to recognize his scent as associated with food G-giver, not food. The 8-month mark was critical. Nathaniel Jr. went hunting again, this time with only 2 companions, Robert Hampton and James Rutherford. Josiah guided them as required. He led them past the area where he had positioned a dummy, soaked in their scents hidden in underbrush. He watched to see if the panthers were nearby, if they had learned to investigate these scent markers. They had fury. The young male stalked the dummy from downwind. He didn't attack. It wasn't real prey, just fabric and straw. But he investigated. He circled. His pupils dilated with interest. Josiah called him off quietly. A low whistle they had come to associate with his presence. Fury retreated. The white men never saw him. Oblivious as always, by the 10th month, the Panthers would actively search for the scent mark dummies when Josiah led them to the area. They had learned that these specific scents meant something interesting. Not quite prey yet, but something worth investigating. Josiah began the next phase. He needed the Panthers to associate these scents not just with food, but with living prey. He captured raccoons and some alive using traps. He rubbed them with the scented clothing, then released them where the Panthers hunted. The Panthers learned to track the scent, find the living animal, kill, and eat it. The scent became linked not to static dummies, but to movement, life, the thrill of the hunt. By month 12, Josiah had 3 Panthers who would track specific human scents with interest, who had learned to associate those scents with prey animals, and who trusted him enough to take direction through whistles and hand signals he had developed over hundreds of hours of interaction. They weren't domesticated. They were still wild animals, but they were conditioned, pointed like weapons toward specific targets. The hardest part was teaching them to hunt as a team when commanded. Panthers are typically solitary hunters, but Josiah had raised these 2 cubs alongside their mother. They already knew how to coordinate Nemesis had taught them. Josiah simply reinforced this behavior by rewarding them only when all 3 participated in taking down the scent-marked practice prey. If only one attacked, no food. If all 3 coordinated, abundant reward. By month 15, Josiah had his weapons ready. But he needed the right moment. He needed all 5 targets in one place at the same time. He needed chaos to cover the attack, and he needed an escape route for the Panthers afterward so they could disappear back into the forest before being killed. He spent month 16 preparing the specific location. There were multiple options, but the grand ballroom of the big house offered advantages. Large windows facing the forest, multiple exit points, poor sight lines for firearms in the chaos that would follow. And it offered poetic justice. The elite, celebrating their wealth and power, attacked in their most protected space by the nature they thought they controlled. Josiah learned that the annual Blackwood Christmas Ball was scheduled for December 15th. Nathaniel Jr. would attend along with all his friends. The guest list would include over 140 people from the wealthiest families in Mississippi. It would be the perfect hunting ground. By month 18, Josiah had led the Panthers to the grounds of the big house multiple times at night, always using scent trails, teaching them the route from forest to building. He positioned scent markers at the specific windows he intended to use as entry points. He taught them to leap through when signaled. He rehearsed everything except the actual attack. Ruth watched her husband change during these 2 years. The man who had held Naomi, who had sung to her, who had smiled, that man was gone. What remained was something harder, colder, absolutely focused. He still performed his duties. He was never rebellious or suspicious. But at night, he disappeared into the forest and returned smelling of wild places with scratches on his arms that Ruth knew came from being near apex predators. "Are they ready?" Ruth asked in November, 6 months before the 2nd anniversary of Naomi's death. "Almost," Josiah said. "1 more month, and you. Are you ready?" Josiah thought about this. "I've been ready since June 7th, 1852. But now, I'm also prepared. There's a difference. What happens after? After I run north, I'll send word when it's safe. You follow. What if they catch you? They won't. I'll be gone before they understand what happened. What if the Panthers kill innocents? They won't. They're trained to hunt specific scents. As long as those 5 men are present and marked, the Panthers will focus on them. Ruth held her husband's face in her hands. I don't know if this is justice or murder or madness, but I know they killed our daughter, and you're the only one brave enough to fight back. So, I'm with you. All the way. December came cold to Mississippi. Not the brutal cold of the North, but cold enough that fireplaces burned in the big house and the quarters alike. The Christmas ball was 1 week away. Josiah spent every night that week in the forest with the Panthers, running final rehearsals. He had clothing from all 5 targets recently stolen. He rubbed it on practice dummies. He let the Panthers smell, track, attack. They were perfect, coordinated, focused, ready. On December 14th, 1 day before the ball, Josiah did something he had never done in 2 years of training. He brought the Panthers to the edge of the forest during twilight, close enough to see the big house clearly. He let them see the building, smell the smoke from its chimneys, understand that this structure, this place, was connected to the scents they had learned to hunt. Nemesis growled, a sound like distant thunder. The cubs shifted restlessly. They understood tomorrow they would hunt. That night, Josiah held Ruth one last time. No matter what happens tomorrow, I love you. I've always loved you, and Naomi loved you. She knew that she died knowing she was loved. Ruth cried, "Kill them all for her. I will, I promise." December 15th dawned clear and cold. The grand ballroom was decorated with evergreen boughs and red ribbons. 3 massive Christmas trees cut from the forest and dragged to the house by enslaved hands stood in corners decorated with imported glass ornaments. Tables groaned under the weight of food: roasted turkeys, baked hams, sweet potato pies, cakes, puddings, all prepared by Ruth and the kitchen staff over the previous week. Crystal bowls held punch. Champagne chilled in ice brought down from the north at considerable expense. The chandeliers were lit with 200 candles, bathing everything in warm, flickering light. The orchestra, composed of enslaved musicians trained from childhood to play classical European music, practiced in the corner. Guests began arriving at 7 o'clock in the evening. Carriages lined the circular drive, women in silk gowns, men in tailored suits. Laughter and conversation filled the ballroom. Master Blackwood greeted guests personally, pride evident in every word. Mistress Magnolia ensured every detail was perfect. Enslaved servants circulated with trays of drinks and hors d'oeuvres, invisible as furniture until needed. Nathaniel Jr. arrived fashionably late at 7:45 with his 4 friends: Thomas Caldwell, Robert Hampton, James Rutherford, and William Peaton. They were already drunk, having started drinking at 4 in the afternoon. They laughed too loudly, made crude jokes, leered at the young women present. Several fathers moved their daughters away from the group. No one said anything. These were the sons of wealthy men. They were allowed to be boisterous. By 8:30, the ballroom held 143 people. Dinner was announced. The guests moved toward the dining hall. Musicians began playing a waltz. Everything was perfect, exactly as tradition demanded. Josiah watched from the kitchen window. He had been waiting there since 7 o'clock, officially available if Master Blackwood needed him for anything, but really just observing, waiting for his moment. Ruth stood beside him, her hand in his. She squeezed once, he squeezed back. Then he left through the kitchen door, walking casually toward the forest, as if going to check traps. The Panthers were waiting where he had left them, in a depression 200 yards from the house, downwind, so the scents from the ballroom wouldn't reach them prematurely. Nemesis paced restlessly. The cubs watched Josiah with predatory intensity. This was the moment they had trained for. They knew. Josiah pulled out the 5 pieces of clothing he had stolen over the previous week. Fresh, recent, He rubbed raw meat on each piece, then placed them in a sack he had prepared. He walked back toward the house, moving through shadows, placing the scented fabric at specific locations, by the west windows that faced the forest, by the south entrance that led to the gardens, by the stone paths where guests might wander for fresh air. He was marking the territory, creating a scent trail that would lead the Panthers exactly where he wanted them. Then he returned to the Panthers and gave the command he had trained them to recognize. A low, guttural sound that mimicked a wounded deer. A sound that signaled prey was vulnerable and the hunt could begin. He pointed toward the big house. "Hunt," he whispered. It wasn't a word they understood, but they understood his intention, his posture, the excitement in his voice, and they understood the scent trail he had laid. Nemesis led. She moved through the darkness like liquid shadow, absolutely silent, despite weighing 160 pounds. Fury and vengeance followed, one on each side, a coordinated pack. Josiah followed at a distance, watching to ensure they stayed focused. The Panthers reached the first scent marker by the west windows. Nemesis paused, sniffed deeply, and her pupils dilated to black pools. She recognized this. This was prey. This was hunt. Her cubs moved up beside her, equally focused. Inside the ballroom, visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows, people danced and laughed, completely unaware that 3 apex predators were now fixated on specific individuals inside. Nathaniel Jr. stood near the center of the room, drink in hand, telling a story that made his friends laugh. Thomas Caldwell was getting another drink from the bar. Robert Hampton was dancing with a young woman. James Rutherford was examining the Christmas decorations. William Peaton was by the west window, looking out at the darkness, standing less than 10 feet from where 3 Panthers crouched in hunting position. Josiah gave the final signal, a sharp whistle that meant attack. Nemesis exploded through the window in a shower of glass and crystal and shredded fabric. She was airborne for the full distance, 8 feet of muscled fury, and she hit William Peaton with the full force of 160 pounds, traveling at 25 miles per hour. The impact knocked him backward onto the marble floor. He didn't have time to scream before Nemesis's jaws closed on his throat, fangs punching through skin and muscle and windpipe and spine. Blood sprayed across white marble and silk gowns in the decorative Christmas tree behind him. Fury came through the same window 1 second later, targeting Thomas Caldwell at the bar. Caldwell turned at the sound of breaking glass, saw the Panther tried to run. Fury took him down in 3 strides, massive jaws closing on the back of his neck, biting down with 700 pounds per square inch of pressure. Caldwell's neck broke with a sound like a dry branch snapping. He was dead before he hit the ground. Vengeance, the female cub, came through a different window, the one near where Robert Hampton danced. She landed on a table, scattering champagne glasses and punch bowls, and launched herself at Hampton from above. He looked up at the last instant and raised his arms in defense. Useless. Vengeance's claws, 2 and long, curved, sharp as surgical blades, shredded his forearms to bone. Her jaws closed on his face, fangs punching through his left eye socket and out the back of his skull. He fell backward, vengeance riding him down, worrying his corpse like a dog with a toy. The ballroom erupted in chaos, screaming, panic, people running in every direction, trampling each other, crashing into furniture and decorations. The orchestra abandoned their instruments. Women fainted. Men shouted for weapons. The 3 Panthers ignored everyone except their primary targets. Nathaniel Jr. stood frozen for 3 critical seconds, drink still in his hand, brain unable to process what his eyes were seeing. Those 3 seconds saved his life briefly. Nemesis finished with William Peaton dead, throat torn out, blood pooling, and turned toward Nathaniel. She moved across the ballroom floor with terrifying speed, knocking people aside like bowling pins. Nathaniel finally dropped his glass and ran, sprinting toward the dining hall entrance. Nemesis pursued, closing the distance with each stride. Nathaniel reached the doorway, tried to slam the door shut too slow. Nemesis hit the door with her shoulder, splintering it from its hinges. The door and Nathaniel both went down in a tangle of wood and flesh. Nathaniel scrambled away on his hands and knees, screaming for help. His father, Master Blackwood, grabbed a decorative sword from the wall and ran toward his son. "Get away from him, you devil!" Nemesis snarled, a sound that vibrated through the floorboards and made everyone in the room feel it in their bones. She crouched over Nathaniel Jr. like a lioness over a gazelle. Her jaws opened wide, and she bit down on his shoulder, fangs sinking deep into muscle and bone. Nathaniel screamed high-pitched and agonized. Nemesis lifted him, 170 pounds of human, and shook him like a dog shakes a rat. His shoulder separated with a wet, tearing sound. Blood sprayed across the walls. She dropped him and repositioned, going for the throat. Master Blackwood swung the sword, hitting Nemesis across the back. The blade cut through fur and skin, drawing blood. Nemesis released Nathaniel and turned on his father with pure predatory fury. She swiped with her left paw, claws extended. The blow caught Master Blackwood across the face, peeling skin away in 4 parallel lines from forehead to jaw. His right eye was torn from its socket. He fell backwards, screaming, the decorative sword clattering away. Nemesis returned to Nathaniel Jr., who was trying to crawl away despite the destroyed shoulder and blood loss. She placed one massive paw on his back, pinning him to the floor. Then, she bit down on the back of his skull. Her fangs punctured bone. She bore down with all her jaw strength, crushing the skull like an eggshell. Nathaniel's body convulsed once, then went still, dead. 7 minutes after the first window broke. Meanwhile, Fury had found James Rutherford hiding behind an overturned table. Rutherford held a chair like a weapon, shouting for the Panther to stay back. Fury paced, circling patient. He faked left. Rutherford jabbed with the chair, and Fury went right, closing the distance before Rutherford could recover. Claws rad across Rutherford's stomach, opening him from ribs to pelvis. Intestines spilled out, gray and pink, and steaming in the cool air. Rutherford looked down at his own organs in disbelief, tried to push them back inside, then collapsed. Fury bit down on his head, crushing his skull just as his mother had done to Nathaniel Jr. Dead 9 minutes since attack started. Vengeance was the most efficient killer. After killing Robert Hampton, she had moved through the room, identifying targets by scent, ignoring everyone else. The remaining target was already dead. Thomas Caldwell killed in the first seconds. She circled the ballroom once, confirming, then moved toward the window to exit. But Master Blackwood, face destroyed, gone, wasn't finished. He grabbed the fallen sword again and staggered toward Vengeance as she passed. He swung wild, driven by rage and pain and grief. His son was dead, his face destroyed. His Christmas ball transformed into an abattoir. The sword connected with Vengeance's back leg, cutting deep. She yowled, spun, and hit Master Blackwood with both paws, claws extended. She drove him to the ground and bit down on his throat, severing his corroded artery. Blood fountained across her face. Master Blackwood died in 4 seconds, drowning in his own blood. The attack had lasted 10 minutes. 5 targets, 5 kills, plus 2 additional kills. William Peaton and Master Blackwood, 7 dead total, 13 injured from panic and trampling, and over 100 witnesses who would never forget the sight of 3 Black Panthers moving through the grand ballroom like vengeful spirits, killing with surgical precision, while blood turned white marble to red, and screams echoed off painted ceilings. Josiah, watching from outside, gave the recall signal. The Panthers responded instantly. They disengaged, ignored the remaining humans, and exited through the broken windows. They moved across the grounds at full speed, following the scent trail back toward the forest. Josiah ran ahead of them, leading them toward the caves near Jackson Creek, where they would be impossible to track in darkness. Behind them, the big house burned with light and noise. Someone had rung the plantation bell, calling for help. Overseers came running with rifles. Neighboring plantation owners arrived within the hour, armed and furious. Search parties formed immediately. Bloodhounds were brought out, but the scent trail led to water, and the hounds lost it. The Panthers had disappeared into thousands of acres of forest and swamp, where white men didn't dare follow at night. Josiah returned to the quarters an hour after the attack. He came from the opposite direction, as if he had been checking trap lines to the east. Ruth saw him coming and ran to him. "Is it done?" "It's done. All 5, plus Master Blackwood and William Peaton. 7 dead. 7 dead. Justice for Naomi." Ruth pulled him into their cabin. "They'll come for you. They'll suspect. Let them suspect. I was here. You're my alibi. We were in the cabin together. Dozens of people in the quarters saw me return before the attack happened. It was a lie, but a lie Ruth would support." "What about the Panthers?" "Safe. I released them far from here. They'll return to their normal territory. Just animals, wild. If anyone connects them to me, there's no proof. I'm just the hunter who tracked them. I didn't train them. I didn't command them. I'm just a slave who hunts game." The next hours were chaos. White men swarmed the plantation, questioning slaves, threatening, occasionally beating those who seemed too calm or not frightened enough. They questioned Josiah for 2 hours. Where was he? What did he see? Did he know anything about the Panthers? Had he noticed them acting strangely? Josiah played his role perfectly. He was shocked, frightened, concerned for Master Blackwood's family. He confirmed that yes, there were Panthers in the area. He had been tracking them for years. Yes, they were dangerous. No, he had never seen them attack humans before. Yes, it was unusual behavior. Perhaps they were starving. Perhaps they had rabies. Perhaps they were defending cubs. He couldn't say. He was just a slave, not an expert on animal behavior. The white men wanted to believe him because the alternative was terrifying. If a slave could train Panthers to kill white men on command, then no slave could be trusted. No plantation was safe, and the entire social order was threatened. Much easier to believe this was a freak accident. Wild animals acting unpredictably. Over the next week, hunting parties combed the forest. They found panther tracks. They found the caves near Jackson Creek. They found evidence of dens. But they never found the specific panthers responsible. The animals had vanished into the wilderness. Some hunters claimed they spotted a large female panther, but when they pursued, she led them into impossible swamp and disappeared. Fury and vengeance were never seen again. By Christmas Day, the official story was set. Wild panthers, possibly raid, had attacked during the ball. 7 dead, including Master Cornelius Blackwood and his only son. A tragedy unprecedented, but ultimately just a natural disaster like a tornado or flood. The funerals were elaborate. All 7 men were buried in the Notch City Cemetery in expensive tombs. Ministers preached about God's mysterious ways and how the righteous would be rewarded in heaven. The entire white population of Adams County attended. They mourned publicly, but privately many breathed easier. The 5 young men had been cruel even by the standards of their peers, and Master Blackwood had been a harsh man, disliked by his neighbors. In the slave quarters there was no mourning. There was quiet satisfaction. There were whispers. The story spread through the grapevine telegraph, the invisible network of communication that connected every plantation in Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama, Georgia. A slave named Josiah at Blackwood Plantation had trained Panthers to kill his daughter's murderers. The story grew with each telling. Some versions said he commanded 100 Panthers. Some said he was descended from African kings who spoke to lions. Some said the Panthers were spirits of murdered slaves,